Good evening, everyone, and happy to join you here today evening. And just carrying forward from where Ravi left it. So it's a continuation of that. So one is that we at IndusInd Bank shared the same, I would say, thought process, saying that how do we put a central brain or a central nervous system into place, wherein I'm not looking at individual silos, a fraud guard for credit card, separate system which just looks at net banking, somebody just looking at AML scenarios within a core banking system. How do we connect it all together and see, where actually patterns are kind of going out of track? So to look at, so I'll just, while the stuff is there, so we wanted, a system which can look at scenarios across. We wanted to definitely comply with the regulatory guidelines and to say that, what is mandated is available and do. But the story, I don't think, ends at what is mandated. It is tick mark. You have some circular that comes and says, these are IBA listed scenarios. This is something. But if you really want to kind of go beyond and put a system into place, you need to think beyond. So today, for example, what we're running is not what was mandated. It's a starting, or it's something that is a reference. But then you think beyond and try to do stuff on that. So cross-channel is something which is very, very important, and will carry forward that theme. Another thing is that this is a living system, which means that it is not that, you kind of get something in, put it in, and then it continues to run like that for 5 years. We have had examples and our own experiences where in a previous fraud system, it was not so easy for you to kind of tweak around stuff, which means that, you wrote some rule in 2008, and it continues to run like that. While the situation and the scenarios in the real world have changed, and it is no longer yielding. And so it's like, I'm running an op shop. I get something, I do my job and go back home, but I get out of it, I don't know. So these were, our objectives that we wanted to look at. We did an evaluation. We again looked at, some systems written out here. We also looked at, few other, international players as well. But I think what we discovered was that anybody who's been in this business for a long time, the origin of everybody first actually started from a card fraud. So credit card fraud systems were one of the first in the world. So most of them US-based stuff. And I think the whole genealogy of those systems actually emanates from there. While in the recent times, they have tried to get into multi-channels and they're building, but still, I think the heart of it, it is very much embedded in, that methodology of looking at a card fraud. Second thing is that, yeah. Yeah. So what we basically wanted to look at is real time was very important. Why real time is very important, as Ravi was saying, is that, if the birds have already flown, what would you do, kind of trying to catch them after that? The speed at which transactions are happening and stuff happens, if you don't kind of, discover it in real time, you would have already be out on that. So you wanted real time. Then another, I think, advantage that we saw is that, again, where this team comes from, they had a very good understanding, especially on the Finacle architecture and how communication happens within the app server of Finacle. So one very important part of Finacle being one of the biggest transaction processing system in a bank or any other core banking system is that you need to harness a lot of data for you to actually apply some meaningful rules. Now, if you start looking at your tables in the core banking system, you may realize that what you finally store in tables is maybe 15–20% of what actually comes into you. So if you look at a card transaction, if I have an ISO message which is coming in, what I will finally store in the transaction history table is few fields out of that. And if I have to start applying rules on what is actually in the transaction history table, you may not be able to do much on that, which means that you have to actually catch stuff on the fly while it is still in the application server, and much more than what finally gets committed to the databases without impacting the performance of that system. So that was, I think, another great thing, because, somebody can come with a very good fraud system, but it's like, it's the inlet, in the hopper. If you are not able to kind of put stuff on the hopper, you may have a very good engine. It will be, the output will be as good as the input. So input is also very important, that you have to catch a lot of stuff. happening. And fraud and AML coming together. I think there have been specialized system. Somebody just looking at AML, somebody just looking at fraud. But at the base of it, while there are differences, and we'll talk of it as we go along, looking at it together was very important. And another thing is that finally at the end of it, what you are doing is you are actually applying some rules onto events that are happening in real time. So while you can do it on the negative side, nothing stops you from applying it from the positive side. So if you say that this is a fraudulent transaction, you can also look at this is a potential transaction where I can do more for the customer. Can I reach out to him and suggest something better, a new product, upsell, cross-sell, whatever. So that is also something we are toying with those ideas, and we will take it forward in that direction as well. Now, where we stand today, if you see, we have tried to do a lot of real-time integration with most of the major systems of the bank, whether it is CRM, it is the employee system. We are even trying to see if somebody is logged into Finacle, is that actually employee logged in the bank system, as attendance has been marked, because you can have internal scenarios also that passwords are getting shared, stuff like that. Then looking at CRM platform, if addresses have got changed, then you can cross apply those scenarios and see what is happening in the customer's life. Core banking is definitely one of the bigger one. So there are a lot of on the left side which are actually real-time integration, online real-time data flowing in and rules getting applied on that. And then you will have some systems you will not do real time, but you will at least bring in a daily batch and see that how do you apply scenarios on that, because those transactions are not really real time. It is internal processing that is happening. And definitely remittances is one of the stuff. And at the core of it, you have your AML, you have your EFM, which is the fraud management system. That is how it is running. Moving forward. So what we have now is that we are running two systems here in the same box as part of the same scenario. So one is the the EFM, the fraud management system, and another is the AML one. Now, just touching a bit on further on what happens in this is, so in AML, what are you trying to do is that one is that you're looking at what are the various scenarios that are happening. So you may write certain rules and say that these are kind of AML scenarios where money laundering is happening. So sudden upsurge in transactions, cash in, cash out. So you can have X number of scenarios. Some of them are mandatorily IBA and such certified scenarios, and some of them you have to think about yourself. But I think what Ravi said about is that what is the combined intelligence? I have thought about say 140, 150. Can banks come together and say, okay, this is something that we have observed and this is something that we should implement, which means that collective brain comes in and you start saving each other's skin on that. So that is happening. Then on the AML side, what you're trying to do is that you're trying to do the risk scoring of the customer. So based on the, otherwise what happens is every core banking has a risk scoring, and there is an RBI mandated risk scoring algorithm that is also given, because RBI says that you have to risk score your customer in medium, high, low, and then there are a lot of other processes that can kick in based on the risk scoring. So based on the nature of business, based on the turnover, based on the transactions that are happening and stuff, based on the location of the customer, international transactions and all, there is a risk scoring. But what happens is that how much you can actually do it in a dynamic basis within core, because generally it is a very heavy batch, and maybe you will run it once in 3 months, once in 6 months. But if actually customers transactions turnover stuff is actually changing by the minute, because in one account suddenly something comes in, which means that risk scoring has to go for a change, which has to be dynamically done. So that is very important part. How do you do the risk scoring of that? Third thing in AML perspective is that how do you resolve the entity? So when I say resolve the entity, is that how do you build out relationship with the X person coming in with the Y which is already existing in the system, which is to say that there are circular transactions, there are linked transactions, there are flows throughs happening which are actually money laundering kind of flow throughs. So how does system, and I think there is a I would say capability in the system to do that part. You can resolve. While on the fraud side, you call it by the name of link analysis, where you say that if some transactions have happened, you can link them together, that how actually the whole flow through happened. If you can visually see it, you can make sense of it, what is actually happening. And similarly on the AML side, you have to resolve those entities, say that what are the obvious and non-obvious relationship with the entities that actually are existing in your system. So that is on the AML side. On the fraud side, I think what we said is rules is very important, and your ability to flexibly change those rules is very, very important, because as days go by, and when you observe what is coming out of those rules, you have to keep on. It is like machine is running, and you keep on turning the levers and to see that the output that is coming, which means that your false positive should not be very high. You should not be spending too much time that you got 100 things out and you caught only 2 fish, which means we have wasted our effort on 80, which means that that stuff has to be continuously fine-tuned. And it is an exercise that happens over a period of time, which means that you should have ability not to be dependent too much on code technology, coding stuff, which they have the scenario authoring tool, where on the front end you can actually go and change those values, see what is the impact of that, and keep on fine-tuning your rules. So I think those are the broad. And another thing which works on both sides is that how do you kind of look at changes in patterns over a period of time. So that is something that can give you a pointer on AML. It can give you a pointer on fraud, that if you build out a pattern over a period of time, and then are you detecting anomalies against that, and that maybe gives you an indication that something is going wrong. But at the same time, what is very important is that you cannot be talking of something which happened a long time in the past. For example, let's say there are check returns happening on a certain account, and you build a rule around that. Now, is that relevant if it has happened in the recent past, or it is relevant if it happened maybe more than 12 months back? Which means that the thinking brain, if I am the guy who's dealing with that account, I have to look at what is recent and maybe forget what has happened in the distant past to actually arrive at a logical conclusion, saying that whether it is wrong or right. So if something happened 12 months back, and after that if something is okay, maybe it is not something that I should be really bothered about. So how do you actually keep on learning and forgetting is also part of the whole story, right? So we have both AML and fraud right now running, and again talking of cross channel. Yeah, so I'll just skip. I've already talked of what are the benefits and all. So this is the traditional view we have been doing. So we have remittances, you have other watch lists that you do. You will have your channels, you will have credit card, you will have debit card, you have core, and each of them are applying stuff within that same database. But what if customer life is not like that? Customer is connected. Customer is having a debit card from you. Customer is having a credit card from you. Customer is using net banking from you. Now, can I, in the current systems, look at scenarios where you say that customer used the credit card in India, but net banking login is happening from outside India? Is that possible? Now, if those systems are not talking to each other, you will miss that pattern, right? And even from, again, the people who are really doing the frauds, they are very smart people. So they will, it's that, it's the chore police thing. So sometime one day one guy was ahead, and second day the original guy is ahead. So you have to keep on revising that. But I think if you logically think of that, people spoof stuff within, if you're looking at just one database, there have been instances that have happened wherein, and major attacks on India, where millions have been overnight taken out, wherein they were able to get inside data centers of Indian card companies, change values in the core application level at the databases, and withdraw money across the world. Now, because if any fraud management is happening, it is just happening on that, and that system doesn't find any anomaly, because it says, yes, there is balance and money is getting withdrawn, so what is the problem? But what if you had cross connection of that, saying that this card is actually getting used outside, but this guy has last few hours. So if you look at count, if you look at velocity, if you look at patterns, you find if there is a difference in that, and that is something maybe that guy cannot spoof across multiple systems. So people have, maybe they are state-sponsored stuff happening. We have heard that. We have now again alerts coming from CERT for tomorrow as well. There is a major attack being mounted on Indian, banks tomorrow. So I think all banks are basically preparing. So I think this is a warfare that is happening. I think the best way to kind of bring down economies is that if you, impact the financial system and just take out, current or, people's wealth from one country into another. It's the simplest way to do that. So I think the way where you can control it is that this comes together and you start comparing patterns not within the same silo of a single database, but looking at stuff which is across and then saying, is there an anomaly in that pattern? And second thing is that you can't do it in batch. You can't say, okay, yesterday this all happens, let me import this, put it into X system, run some batch, run some report, and then discover, because then you're discovering post facto and you can say, okay, this happened. Now, can you discover while it is happening and stop it? So when that Christmas night money was being taken out of that one particular data center, could we have acted at that point in time and stopped it? So, or in the scenarios most it happened is next day morning you get to know it and then you will report saying this much money has been lost, right? So I think that is our experience on this. We have already kind of now spent, so I would say the first phase around June of last year is when we started putting scenarios in production. We have been maturing stuff with them, so it's not that everything starts becoming hunky-dory from day zero, because if it is a brain has to learn things over a period of time. As your past, I would say, patterns become more prominent, the better the system gets on that. From I think Jan of this year, we have now most of the bulk of the stuff that we have on the system. Now we are exploring opportunities can be also applied on the positive side and help customers to get better products and services from the bank. So that's where we are, and we have bestowed our faith in customer XPS, and we always keep saying them that you have to maintain that trust. They're doing a good job, so we wish them all well. Thank you.